At 22:43, the storm rolled in with no warning. The radar room at Forward Operating Base Crosswind lit up once, blinked, then blacked out completely. Seconds later, power cut across the flight line. Tower lights died. Perimeter defenses froze mid-sweep. Inside the command post, backup generators struggled against the surge, then fell silent. No comms, no satellite feed, no eyes. It was like someone had thrown a blackout blanket over the entire grid. Captain Mason threw his headset down and crossed to the window. But all he saw was static crawling across black glass. Wind howled across the blast walls. Rain hit sideways. It wasn't supposed to storm in the high desert this time of year. Not like this. Not with electromagnetic interference. Not with this kind of timing. Colonel Harper stood near the center table, staring at a dead comm console. His hand tapped the edge twice. The room smelled like ozone and old coffee. A junior intel officer, Corwin, maybe, checked the auxiliary channels again. Nothing. Not even static. Just silence. "We've lost visual, sir," one of the techs muttered. "Not just visual," Harper replied. "We've lost everything." A minute passed. Then two. The entire base was holding its breath, unsure whether they were blind or alone. The wind climbed into a scream, rattling hangar doors and tearing at the canvas over the fuel depot. MMWVs sat like dark fossils under emergency tarps. Even the flight line crews had pulled back. Nobody moved. Nobody risked a silhouette. At 22:52, a sound cut through the noise. It wasn't thunder, it had weight, rhythm, low and steady like something hunting. One of the watch sergeants blinked, confused, and stepped toward the now dead tower scope. He turned to Harper and said it before anyone else. "That's rotor wash." Everyone froze. They shouldn't be hearing rotors. No one had flight clearance. Every rotary wing asset on base was grounded since 1700 due to the magnetic interference. The nearest friendly air unit was 210 miles out. Even medevac birds had been told to sit tight. Nothing should be airborne in this. But the sound was growing louder. At 22:54, a silhouette broke through the storm, low, fast, and lights out. The shape moved like an AH-64D, but the approach was all wrong. It came in crosswind, hugging terrain, blades screaming against the gusts. No running lights, no transponder ping, no tower call-in. It bled speed just feet above the rain-slick tarmac and flared hard in front of the med tent. 3 bodies dropped from the side bay. The bird lifted again without powering down. No taxi, no hover test, no pilot signature. By 22:56, it was gone. The rotors vanished back into the weather, leaving only a brief howl in its wake. No heat signature on FLIR, no returns on ground radar, and no one had seen a face through the canopy. Harper broke the silence. "Get a crew on those casualties now. Move." Medics ran toward the figures in soaked gear, slipping in the mud. One of them was missing a boot. Another had a tourniquet tied just above the knee, blood soaked through desert camo. The third was unconscious, skin pale and cold, but breathing. They'd been MIA for 3 days. Recon Unit Charlie 5 last seen northeast of Navajo Ridge, presumed lost. Mason came back into the ops center 5 minutes later with a soaked clipboard. No flight manifest listed any AH-64 on launch rotation. No one had pulled fuel. Every Apache on the base was still parked cold in Hangar 2. "That wasn't one of ours," he said. The drone footage confirmed it. One UAV, still running on autonomous orbit, had caught a single, grainy flash of the bird just as it flared. The quality was poor. Lightning backlit the frame for 2 seconds. A silhouette. 2 skids. 1 gun mount. Apache, but no visible markings, no tail number, no crew ID. The canopy shimmered with water and flash, completely obscuring the pilot. They ran it through the archive anyway. Nothing matched. By 23:17, the casualties were stabilized. Frostbite, fuel exposure, minor shrapnel. All 3 were now in recovery, but none were awake. None could speak to how they got out. At 23:31, Reyes from Tactical Intelligence pulled Harper aside. "Sir," he said, "that flight path. No way a standard pilot pulls that off in this weather. You saw the angle of descent, the rotor control." She landed on memory, like she's flown that base in Blackout before. Harper didn't answer at first. His jaw clenched once. Then he walked to the display monitor and hit play on the drone footage again. She didn't crash. She didn't miss. She knew exactly where to land. The whole room stared at the paused image on screen. One blurred shot of a bird that shouldn't have flown, landing under conditions no pilot trained for. Who was she? Nobody answered. And outside, the storm screamed on. At 0019, they found the frame. The drone feed had been running off a backup loop, slow and glitchy. But one operator in the surveillance trailer kept scrubbing manually. His name was Patel. new to the base. Still logged hours watching gray static roll across black screens, waiting for something to mean something, and this time, it did. The image was only 4 seconds long. The Apache had already lifted, but just before vanishing into the mist, the pilot turned. Patel froze it, rewound, played it again. There, a turn to the left, slight hesitation in the flight stick, through the front canopy. Just as lightning strobed, her visor tipped, not fully lifted, not enough to reveal a full face, but just enough to show the edge of skin, a cheekbone, a braid coiled behind the helmet, slick with water. He called for Reyes from Intel. They dimmed the overhead lights in the command room and threw the clip on the main display. The image was unstable, corrupted by the storm's electromagnetic haze, but the outline was unmistakable. A pilot, not standard-issue male haircut, not regulation, a braid. Someone in the back muttered, "Could be a decoy, could be stress blur," but no one bought it. They zoomed in, mid-shoulder, just beneath the raised right arm, something glinted, a patch, torn, faded, soaked into the fabric. It wasn't the unit's current rotation. It wasn't even one they recognized. Reyes took a screenshot, pushed it through the enhancement software. Static jumped across the screen as the system tried to reconstruct what the camera had barely captured. Color distortion flared. Shadow mapping failed twice. On the third pass, it cleared enough to show a shape. Harper leaned forward, one hand on the table, top left quadrant. Zoom again. A threadbare insignia came into focus. Black outline, inner edge of a broken wing, lightning bolt etched across it like it had been stitched by hand. No division, no command logo, no country code. Just that shape. The room went still. Harper exhaled slowly. That's not possible. Reyes didn't answer. He just pulled a file from the secure cabinet behind him. No label on the outside. Inside was a printed page, yellowing, corner creased. He slid it next to the screen. The same patch, not a replica. The exact match, older, sharper, cleaned up by time but unchanged. This insignia wasn't just old, it was erased. Ghosted from all TO&E databases after 2014. No call sign, no digital record, no deployment history, not a test unit, not even Black Ops. It was one of those designations that only existed on paper for a few months. Before it was burned, Shadow Echo. Harper closed the file. Everyone in that room had heard the name, but not out loud. Not since Kandahar. Not since the accident. Or whatever they'd chosen to call it. One officer stepped back from the display, shaking his head. That patch isn't supposed to exist anymore. And someone else, barely above a whisper, answered. Maybe she's not supposed to either. The patch had no place in any current registry. Reyes stood over the terminal with his arms crossed, eyes flicking between frames of the enhanced image and a secured archive he'd unlocked with 2 separate logins. The system flagged the symbol as non-standard, obsolete, and restricted. Not expired. Erased. Harper waited beside him, silent. The others in the room leaned in closer as the query returned. One hit buried. Inside a SOCOM vault folder marked Legacy Assets, Discontinued Units. It wasn't a division. It wasn't even official. The tag came back Shadow Echo. Aerial Recovery Experimental Detachment, Joint Special Operations Command. Formed in 2009. Disbanded in 2014 following a mission loss in southern Kandahar. Every mention beyond that was redacted. No unit number, no badge registry, no command tree. Their pilots weren't given traditional squadron IDs. The files listed them by mission outcomes, not names. Just one entry repeated more than once Asset V01. Reyes dug deeper and pulled up the only surviving image from a 2012 team. Debrief. The picture was scanned from a hard copy. Grainy, field-damaged, monochrome. 4 silhouettes stood next to a helicopter half covered in camouflage netting. No smiles, no gear labels. Just one detail still sharp through the film scratches. Second from the left. Flight suit unzipped to the collar. A braid across one shoulder. That same gaze, still direct, unreadable. Harper looked down at the photo and didn't speak. The caption beneath the photo listed a name and a note capped Arya Vale, declared KIA, 27 Feb 2013, Kandahar AOR, status unrecovered, presumed dead, not confirmed, not buried, declared. That single word changed everything. Harper flipped back to the drone frame still frozen on the monitor. Same face, nearly 11 years apart. Same sharp brow, same angle of the head. The braid hadn't changed. Neither had the set of the eyes. That's her, Reyes said, voice low. No one in the room disagreed, not out loud. A tech in the back glanced at a logbook on his screen. then at the photo again, and didn't say what everyone else was thinking. She didn't die. She just disappeared. And if she was flying again now, then she hadn't disappeared for herself. She'd vanished for something else. Something off-grid, undocumented, and still very much alive. The logbook was bound in canvas, edges frayed, ink bled from years of sweat and moisture. Reyes found it tucked beneath the co-pilot's seat inside the Apache. No electronics, no encrypted drive. Just a plain field notebook, the kind issued for personal use, not official mission documentation. A folded cloth was wrapped around it like insulation. The top half of an old flight suit, its patch faded to near gray. Harper didn't open it immediately. He waited until the command center cleared, then brought it into the briefing room and sat alone with it under a single lamp. The first page bore no name, just a date and grid reference. 03 Mar 2016. Grid 7F dust storm. No sat-nav. Terrain soft. 1 LZ. 4 extracted. 1 lost. No comms. No uplink. Logged as civilian crash. Syria border. The next entry was similar. Grid 12K. Southern Yemen. 2 rescued. Burn injuries. Local militias in pursuit. Apache running 1 engine. Night flare descent only. Weather marked as low ceiling. No visual nav. 1 note written in tight handwriting along the edge of the page: survivor. Unconscious. Name unknown. Slipped out of harness during lift. Recovered manually. Page after page, each mission logged with minimal detail. Just enough to mark intention and outcome. No rank, no crew list. Always solo. Always without airspace clearance. Most of the coordinates matched regions that were never officially reported. They spanned a decade. From Central Africa to parts of Iraq under contested control. Occasionally, a civilian call sign was used, or a medevac code no longer in service. There were 57 entries. Of those, 49 involved extraction under direct fire. 33 took place during blackout weather or without satellite support. 12 referenced evac of assets later confirmed missing in Department of Defense. Reports? Most of those survivors were found with no clear explanation of how they made it back. Reyes sat beside Harper and flipped through 1 page at a time. His voice dropped as he read. She pulled out a squad that lost their radio in the Arghandab Basin. No one even knew they were alive. She dropped into Djibouti during the 2019 port fire. No aerial access was authorized within 30 miles. She flew blind into a mining collapse in Helmand with 0 comms and carried 2 out on foot. And not once did she write her name. Only initials sometimes, scrawled at the bottom like a signature no one was meant to read. The book didn't dramatize. It didn't beg for recognition. It documented survival. Hard, slow, deliberate. Each line built a case not for heroism, but for persistence. For showing up where others didn't. Harper closed the logbook at 02:11. By the time the sun rose again, no one on base was questioning who had flown that bird. They were asking how long she'd been doing it, and why they hadn't seen it until now. They called her Ghosthawk, not because of the aircraft. The UH-60 variant by that name never went beyond prototype. This was something else. A call sign passed in low voices and late-night stories. Usually just before a mission in weather no one wanted to fly through. Ghosthawk wasn't logged, she wasn't assigned. But sometimes, she showed up anyway. It started as rumor. Back in 2015, a medevac team out of Camp Bondsteel swore a blacked-out bird pulled 2. Rangers from a canyon under artillery fire. No IF. No ATC clearance. No one believed them until the flight recorder showed rotor wash, 5 minutes. Before evac arrived, a year later, a convoy in Mali took small arms fire during a supply run. Radio was dead. Weather dropped under 200 feet. A single light appeared in the fog. The wounded woke up the next day already in a forward aid station. No one filed a flight plan. No one knew who flew in or out. Then there was Marja. An IED went off along a narrow ridge trail. Unit Bravo was cut off and surrounded. They activated their beacon, but command never received it. The storm that night knocked out 2 satellites and both drones covering the AO. 5 hours later, they made it back with 2 stretchers and a third on a makeshift sled. Pulled behind a utility quad dropped from a helo that didn't exist. When they debriefed, one of the NCOs said he'd seen a pilot in the rain, crouched under the tail boom, adjusting straps. Small, fast hands, flight suit soaked, patch blacked out. The braid was the only thing he remembered clearly. That, and her voice telling him to keep his head down until the skids lifted. No one could confirm it, but they all started using the same name afterward. Ghosthawk. Reyes gathered field reports from over a dozen theaters. Each had the same pattern. Unmarked extractions. Impossible landings. No radar signature. No award. No medal. No line in the chain of command. Just witnesses saying someone flew into the storm when they were already written off. It wasn't supernatural. It was skill, cold, methodical, obsessive repetition honed in places no one stayed long enough to write. History. Arya Vale didn't fly for rank. She didn't operate for headlines. She flew because someone needed to. At 0304, Harper stood over the map room and traced a set of flight paths that hadn't matched any sanctioned sortie, one by one. Each intersected locations with confirmed rescues no one had ever claimed. Over time, those arcs formed a pattern, not chaos, not coincidence, a flight plan. One long, broken route stitching conflict zones together like a thread pulling across. Scars. She hadn't been gone. She'd just never come back. And now, with the name surfacing again and the patch in full view, the base stopped thinking of Ghosthawk as a rumor. She was real, and she was flying again. The signal came through at 0127. Short, fragmented, buried in static. Most of the room ignored it. Interference had been rolling through Delta Sector 5 for days. Terrain collapse from the landslides had knocked out every repeater in the grid. Comms were trash. No flights cleared since Wednesday. Intel flagged it as atmospheric junk. But Arya stood still. The pattern, 2 short bursts, 1 long, followed by silence, then 3 clicks. Wasn't just noise, it was a fallback identifier. Something her team used years ago when radio silence was standard in flares. Gave away position. Carol had made that pattern. Carol used to say it was like knocking on a locked door. No one else had the key to. Arya listened to it twice more, then walked out without a word. By 0142, she was inside the readiness hangar, eyes scanning the flight manifest. Every asset was grounded. Air Command had issued a full stand-down due to electrical interference, visibility under 50 feet, and unstable canyon walls. She requested an override anyway. The tower denied her request at 0147. No personnel authorized to deploy into Delta 5. No evac team formed. No support aircraft in reserve. The area was a red zone. Arya nodded once, then turned toward the far bay, where the MH-60M Blackhawk was undergoing a diagnostic sweep. It wasn't prepped for flight, but the rotors were intact. The IR suppressors had already been tuned. She didn't need long-range comms. She needed terrain masking and lift. At 0154, she began rigging it herself. 1 external fuel tank. No co-pilot. The FLIR pod had partial functionality. She hard-coded the grid reference by memory, swapped the HUD navigation input for manual topographic overlays. She removed the rear benches for space, rigged the med harnesses by hand, loaded a single suppressed M4 and 1 trauma kit, 5 morphine injectors, water tabs. The weather outside was dropping. Rain slammed the roof in sheets. The base was quiet, lights low. No one noticed when she rolled the bird out under blackout conditions. She wore no helmet, only the headset, tied into shortwave, and an old flight jacket she hadn't touched in years. She marked her boots on the deck once before climbing in. The start sequence took 40 seconds. She throttled up slow to avoid signature. Blades began to turn at 0209. By 0212, she was airborne. No tower clearance, no escort. She stayed low, nap of the earth, hugging the contours of the terrain. The MH-60M bucked in the wind but held. She cut east, then dipped south beneath the ridgeline, keeping her course tight against rock walls. In her lap was a folded slip of paper. 1 handwritten line. If she's still alive, she wouldn't have stopped knocking. Arya didn't fly for hope. She flew because she heard the knock again, and no one else had the key. The rain hit sideways at 0217, thick and burning with sediment. Arya flew through it, face set, 1 hand on the collective, the other on cyclic. Visibility dropped to less than 50 feet. The MH-60M bucked with crosswinds rolling out of the canyon. No radar, no horizon line. Every turn rode on terrain memory and the echo of habit built in Blackout. Flights long before this one. She stayed nap of the earth, skimming just above dry wash gullies now roaring with runoff. Lightning stuttered across her canopy in white arcs. The glass trembled with pressure changes, and the cockpit shook like it wanted to tear loose. Every second, she recalculated. Every second. She stayed low enough to vanish but high enough to clear debris. At 0224, she cleared the last ridge and dropped eyes on the zone. The bridge was gone. Concrete and steel twisted downstream. 3 vehicles burned black against the floodplain. 1 had rolled on its side. She swept left, then pulled hard into a hover. Flare smoke bloomed red through ash. The signal was weak. Crooked. Someone held it in their hand, arms stretched upward, knuckles barely clenched. Arya set the Blackhawk down hard, tail kicked left on touchdown. Port skid caught loose gravel but held. She cut engine revs to idle and left the blades hot. Then she ran. The first survivor was crawling, his left leg mangled, chest heaving. Arya dragged him by the belt line and secured him against the floorboards with one arm across his ribs. She didn't speak, just moved. Second survivor was already unconscious, wedged beneath a tire wall. She lifted him with a grunt. Fireman carry. The storm roared overhead. A mudslide cracked from the bluff above as she got him inside. The third was still holding the flare. Carol. She was sitting against a tree stump, eyes half open, mouth red. Blood ran from her temple down her collar. Arya crouched in front of her and said nothing. Carol blinked, just once, and let go of the flare. Arya hauled her up and over one shoulder. Behind them, the ravine cracked again. Water surged over the collapsed slope, brown and fast. Arya moved fast, boot heels sliding. She cleared the last 10 feet as the edge caved in behind her. She slammed the door shut and pulled straps tight over all three. The Blackhawk groaned as she pulled up collective and punched full torque. The bird lifted slow, water spiraling up into the rotor wash. Rock chunks slapped the fuselage. One of the rear panels peeled but held. At 0241 she was clear. She didn't speak. No call sign. No comms. She flew straight back through the storm the way she came. Inside the cabin, Carol's hand shifted slightly and found Arya's sleeve. No words, no nod, just contact. And then stillness. At 0409, Arya walked into the debriefing room. The rain had soaked through every layer of her gear. Mud clung to her boots. Her flight suit was stained at the knees and elbows, and the side of her face was streaked with dried ash. She didn't speak when the door closed behind her, just moved to the metal table in the center of the room and placed a single object on its surface, a dog tag. Colonel Harper didn't look at her first. He looked at the tag, then he read the name, lips tightening slightly when he reached the last letter. He set it down carefully, not like a relic, but like something earned. Staff Sergeant Eli Garrison, missing 4 days, presumed KIA when the Delta 5 bridge collapsed. Arya remained standing. Harper gestured toward the seat across from him. She didn't move. He didn't push it. Reyes stood by the wall, arms crossed, a folder under one arm. His uniform was pressed and dry, but the corner of his jaw flexed. He hadn't spoken since she entered. Not until now. Where have you been all these years? Arya didn't blink, didn't shift weight. Where no one looked. Silence followed. Not awkward, not hostile. Just the kind that comes when no one expects an answer to explain everything. And hers didn't try to. She wasn't here for apology, not for explanation. She'd already flown what needed flying. She turned to Harper, voice steady. I need a bird. One more night. Reyes straightened. That's not protocol. You're not cleared for equipment access. You're not even technically... Harper didn't raise his voice. She brought back 3 bodies from an AO we blacked out. She got them out alone. That doesn't grant requisition authority, Reyes snapped. We can't just hand over aircraft based on a hunch. Arya looked at him then. It wasn't a hunch. Harper leaned back, hands folded once on the table. He studied her like a puzzle he already knew the shape of, just not the cut. Explain. Arya pulled a slip of paper from her jacket pocket. She unfolded it slowly and laid it next to the dog tag. Encrypted frequency readouts, time-stamped, cross-referenced against known distress codes. One more voice came through on the last return leg. Same click pattern, different cadence. Not Carol. No. She paused. It was Juno. That name hit harder than protocol. Captain Juno Marshall, MIA 9 years. Declared unrecoverable in northern Kalat province after a nighttime recon op. Vanished from satellite and drone. Last known radio burst was a warning. No follow-up. No signature since. Harper picked up the paper. Ran his thumb across the ink. Then glanced toward Reyes. You read the logs. You saw the dust signature on that bird. You think anyone else could have pulled that landing? Reyes didn't answer. Just looked away. Not in defeat. In understanding. Harper reached into his drawer. Pulled out a key card. Tossed it across the table. Arya caught it in one hand. Nothing more was said. She turned to leave. At the door, she paused. If I don't bring them back, don't come looking. She was gone by 0413. Outside, the sky was beginning to pale. The hangar crew would find the MH-60 pre-flighted by dawn. One tank topped off. Manual chart notes taped to the dash. Harnesses rigged for vertical lift. No crew manifest filed. No flight number entered. Just the call sign scratched in grease pencil on the side window. Ghosthawk, still flying. At 2246, Arya launched. The Blackhawk lifted off without fanfare. No tower chatter. No ground crew farewell. Just rotor wash spiraling off wet tarmac and vanishing into black sky. Storm pressure compressed the air around her like a vice. She took it in with one breath, then nosed down and banked southwest. EMP fields were active within the first 20 clicks. Navigation blinked out by 2252. HUD flickered twice, then failed completely. Arya didn't hesitate. She already knew the route. Muscle memory. A fallback corridor she'd flown once a lifetime ago under fire in Eastern. Takurgar. She killed all internal lights, kept instruments in standby, and dropped altitude until she flew nap of the earth by feel alone. She stayed just above the ridgelines, close enough to smell burned sap and wet rock as lightning lit the sky in sharp bursts. One engine sputtered at 2303, stalling low RPM on the right side. She shifted power manually, rerouted auxiliary flow to stabilize torque. No panic, just adjustment. Every move deliberate, every change driven by instinct drilled years deep. The village sat in a basin northeast of Grid 21B. She saw it first not as a shape, but as a shadow, where there should have been flame. Then a pulse, faint, distorted. A flare barely held together by faulty charge. Red smoke stuttered once, then dissolved into the storm. Arya marked the location and circled wide. No visual reference, no GPS, just terrain memory and the way the land rose and fell beneath her skids. She dropped into descent at 2318. Crosswinds pushed hard. The canopy shuddered. The frame groaned in protest as she forced the nose down through a breach in the ridgeline. Ground proximity alarms chirped once before dying. Visibility dropped to under 30 feet. She flew on. Her left hand worked the collective slow, smooth. Her right made constant micro-corrections on cyclic input. Every push of air moved the bird an inch too far, and she countered without thought. Raindrops hit the windshield like shrapnel. Static cracked through the headset, loud enough to drown out the warning buzz of the failing left alternator. She didn't flinch, didn't ask for course correction, didn't whisper hope, just trimmed pitch, slowed descent, and dropped into the pocket above the village like a diver breaking surface. She skimmed rooftops barely intact, stone ruins wrapped in vines and mud. Her skids missed a power line by inches. She counted 2 burned-out structures, one collapsed stilt shack, and what looked like a small courtyard holding standing water. On the far end, movement. One figure waved a heat-shielded poncho, barely upright. No radio, no beacon. Just that flare burned into her eyes in a posture she remembered too well. Arya leveled the bird, tail barely clearing a broken chimney. The HUD strobed once in red before vanishing for good. She dropped skids at 2324. Hard. Controlled. She was already moving before the rotors fully spun down. No backup, no cover, just Arya. One last time. At Aero 356, the tower caught the first blip. Faint. Skipping. The signal didn't match any standard beacon, but someone in comms flagged it anyway. A damaged transponder. Blackhawk frequency. Low altitude. Vector inbound from the blackout zone. By Zo403, visual contact confirmed it. The MH-60M came in from the west, running uneven rotor RPMs. The nose dipped slightly left with each cycle. Port side armor bore fresh impact dents. The tail housing was scorched near the stabilizer. The bird didn't glide. It held inside. Arya's hands were steady, fuel low. Left engine vibrating through the floor plate. HUD out. Comms limited to VHF fallback. She flew straight in without lights. Tail dragging just enough to stir dust as she cleared the outer perimeter. The tower scrambled emergency crews. Fire teams formed up. Med crews waited at the approach line. Everyone braced for impact. Arya didn't crash. She brought the Black Hawk in at 0409 with deliberate forward pressure on the cyclic, easing collective down one notch at a time. The bird touched the tarmac hard but level, rear skids aligned perfectly. A puff of smoke hissed from the tail boom, then silence. She powered down slowly. Switches flipped in sequence. Hydraulics sighed. She unbuckled with one breath, leaned back just once against the seat, then opened the door. No theatrics, no salute. The rear cabin door opened seconds later. A stretcher was pulled down by medics who didn't ask questions. The survivor, dehydrated, injured, alive, was loaded out with care. She didn't follow them. Instead, Arya stepped down alone. Her boots touched the tarmac like it was familiar ground. She moved without rush, past the edge of the light grid. Coat collar pulled up against wind. She didn't wait for orders. No one stopped her. No one tried. On the pilot seat behind her, tucked into the restraint webbing, she left 2 things. A folded patch, frayed at the edges, black thread, gray shadow, and a note, ink still wet under plastic wrap. Don't log the flight. Just pay it forward. She passed the flight line without a glance back. Disappeared through the service corridor, out the southern gate. By Zo419, the hangar was still. No alarm sounded. No report was filed. The crew chief found the note an hour later. The bird was grounded, the patch stored, the file closed, and somewhere beyond radar range. Past the hills no one patrolled. The sky stayed open. At 09:12 the next morning, the hangar floor was unusually quiet. Crews moved slower than usual, not because of orders, because they were still thinking. A tech leaned against a toolbox. Eyes on the tarmac where scorched skid marks remained. Someone else swept up gravel that hadn't been there yesterday. No one spoke about the landing. They didn't have to. Inside operations, no formal debrief was scheduled. There was no paperwork filed under Arya's name. No flight number. No pilot code logged. The Blackhawk sat under tarp, systems shut down, damage marked in grease pen. But nobody touched it. Not yet. By 10:02, Arya had already passed through the back hallway of the base hospital. She walked without noise, no radio, no escort, just boots on tile and a file folder in her hand. Though no one would ever see what was inside. Carol was in recovery. Upper right quadrant, second room from the end. The hallway light flickered twice. Inside, monitors blinked soft and slow. A saline bag shifted with gravity. The window was open an inch, and the wind moved the curtain just enough to stir the scent of antiseptic. Carol lay there, awake, but not speaking. Her eyes tracked the ceiling, her body still. Arya stood at the threshold for a moment, hand resting on the frame. Then she stepped in and closed the door behind her. No salute, no nod. She sat beside the bed and didn't speak. Carol turned her head just enough to meet her gaze. Her fingers flexed once on the edge of the blanket, not reaching, just steadying. Arya didn't move to help her. She didn't need to. The moment was full without motion. They said nothing for 10 minutes. Just sat, outside the room. A junior mechanic passed the hallway and slowed when she saw the closed door. She paused a beat longer than she should have. Not because she was told to, but because the look in Arya's eyes from the night before still hadn't left. Her mind, back in the mess hall. 2 aircrew quietly compared coordinates that matched rescue grids Arya had flown. They thought they'd been errors. They weren't. The patterns were there, just not in any training manual. Reyes stood by the briefing monitor and watched the flight playback again. No sound, just a black silhouette moving through white static. He didn't call for a rewind, he just let it loop once more. In the corner of the motor pool, someone found the patch Arya had left behind. They didn't pin it to a board or frame it. They folded it and slid it into their front pocket. No explanation, just a quiet nod of understanding. By 11:03, Arya stepped out of Carol's room. She didn't look back. She passed 2 officers on the stairwell who stiffened slightly when they saw her. Not out of protocol, out of something closer to respect. But they didn't stop her. Didn't ask questions. She reached the south fence gate by 11:10. The guard didn't check ID, didn't say a word, just stepped aside as if it had always been written that she would come, and she would go, and that was enough. The legend stayed behind, but the woman kept walking. At 02:11 on a rain-washed Tuesday, a sealed box arrived at Fort Helm. No return address, no signature, just a carbon-stamped manifest with 4 lines. Contents 1 embroidered. Patch. 1 handwritten flight log. 1 key card. Handler authorized. Archive only. Do not digitize. The tech who received it didn't ask questions. She slid it into Archive Room Delta, top shelf behind a steel case marked declassified. But she made a note in pencil on the corner, Echo Shadow, possible legacy. Then locked the door. Weeks passed. Recruits cycled in and out of training rotations. Their uniforms were still stiff, their boots too clean. One of them saw the patch once. A faint silhouette on a flight sim wall, gray thread on black, the shape of wings curling inward like silence. She asked about it. The sergeant said nothing, just looked toward the window where thunder was rolling in. That same night, at a forward station near the Nevada border, a recon unit hit Blackout mid-grid. Static killed their relay at 02:39. Comms failed, drone coverage dropped. The terrain map hadn't been updated since spring. Command called for extraction. No birds were available. Weather was trash. Wind patterns unstable. At 03:42, a single radar ping flared. The operator flagged it out of habit. Anomaly. Altitude 1,200 feet AGL. Speed consistent with a hovering transition. IFF was blank. Heat signature inconsistent, 2 seconds of tracking, then gone. The log auto-cleared before it could be archived. But one of the ground crew at the field hospital swore they saw movement outside the intake bay. Just a flicker, a shadow passing the far end of the hangar glass. Someone leaned forward, pressed against the window. She said she saw a braid move past, whipped by wind, short, tied tight. She didn't file it, just told a friend in mess later, over bad coffee and cold eggs. The friend didn't laugh. Back at Fort Helm, an instructor pulled an old TTP binder from a forgotten shelf. Inside was a hand-marked map of alternate flight corridors, the kind never flown anymore. Wind-coded, terrain flex, each one handwritten in blue ink. The name on the last page was A. Vale. The young pilots noticed it during briefing. One whispered, "Ghosthawk." The instructor didn't answer. He looked out at the tarmac, where nothing moved, and nodded once, barely. They never put her in a ceremony, never painted her name on the wall, but every time thunder rolled and visibility dropped, they checked the skies a little more closely. And when someone asked why a particular corridor was called the Silent Pass, the old ones would just say, because that's where she always came through. No one knew when or how, only that when no one else made it, she did.